All right, we might be live. We should be live. We are here, folks. I'm really excited for this one. This is going to be fun. Let me go ahead and get to my PowerPoint. We'll go ahead and get started. Let me get my laser pointer. All right, very good. So today, guys, we're going to be talking about the age of exploration. This is the second episode. So it looks like audio is good. Marlene, how we doing? First person in the chat, first chatter of the stream. This is going to be episode 2 of our series covering American history for the 250th anniversary of the United States this year, 2026. If you haven't already, please go check out the first episode we did about 3 weeks ago on pre-Columbian America, and we focused exclusively on the indigenous cultures of America prior to European arrival. Today we're going to be talking about European arrival. So we're going to learn all about the Age of Exploration, what it is, why it's important to history, all that jazz. I'm really looking forward to it. And today I actually have my charger for my phone, so it's not going to die, so I can do chat. Very good, excited to watch and learn. Yes, Marlene, me and her were talking about this a couple days ago, the Age of Exploration, so I'm really excited. Before we get started as well, I'm going to wait a couple minutes for people to get in here. I'm going to keep this stream up after this. You guys can watch it at any point. You can watch it years from now. I'll keep it up. I'm really excited. This is one of the topics I'm most passionate about. I had to delay the stream. It was originally supposed to be last week, so I'm sorry about that. I'm still kind of new with Microsoft. Here at my college, we have to use Microsoft stuff, so Microsoft PowerPoint. What happened was my entire slideshow got deleted that I've been working on, so I had to redo the entire thing. And I made this entire slideshow today. It's like 30-something slides. So that's why it got delayed. I just didn't have time to finish it. Let me know if the audio goes bad, guys, at some point during the stream. But we're going to get started. I'm also not in the usual setup for this stream because the library multimedia center was booked today. Somebody else was doing something in there, so we had to come into this study room at the bottom of my dorm. I'm sure you guys have seen me in this study room at some point if you've been watching videos lately. But this is going to be a very interesting live stream. And so we're going to be looking at the Age of Exploration. I have 3 videos that we're going to watch and react to halfway through. They have to do mostly with contact with Native Americans, but we're going to learn all about the details of the Age of Exploration because it's a topic that likes to very much get simplified in most topics we're going to go over in this series. Simplified in traditional American education. So we're going to be going through some different stuff. Anybody in the chat, you get, I'm going to have a little quiz for you guys. What is going on here? Can anybody in the chat, there's 3 people in the chat, you guys want to take a stab at who these people are while we wait for people to get in? Marlene, can you name any of these 4 people that we have on the title screen here? See, if we can't, I'll tell you, because we're going to learn all about them later on in this stream. So this stream's also going to be more of a global view of the Age of Exploration. It's not going to be exclusively on the United States, although you guys might think it is. I'm actually going to have a more global approach to the Age of Exploration. So this video can be watched even if you're a non-United States history enthusiast, if you just want to learn about the Age of Exploration in general. We're going to be talking about many different nations that were involved in the Age of Exploration. Most of the later part of the video is going to be focused more on America, and the beginning part is going to be more focused on global affairs. And so we're going to be learning all about that, the reasons for exploration, all that stuff. Marlene, can you name anybody on the title screen? Well, this right here is Christopher Columbus. Obviously, probably the most famous of all explorers. This is Juan Ponce de Leon, which we're going to learn about later. Marlene, you've been to his grave in San Juan, Puerto Rico. I'm jealous. I want to go some time. And this is Hernan Cortez, the conqueror of the Aztecs, and then the emperor of the Aztecs, Montezuma II. So we're going to learn all about them today. I have an entire global image to start off because I'm going to be taking a global approach to this. So one more minute at 8:37, we're going to kick off this presentation. So I'm really excited to get into this. Anybody else in the chat want to talk? Don't be scared, guys. Christopher Columbus, that's correct. Marlene, I think it blocked your comment on my end. I had to open it to all comments because I guess Christopher Columbus is a controversial figure, especially in these days. He is a very controversial figure. But we're going to learn about him today. Let's get started with the age of exploration. So obviously I like to start with, just an overview of what is the age of exploration. It's also known as the age of discovery. So both terms are used. I have a map here just kind of showing the age of exploration. Just kind of an overview of it. So it was a period between the 15th and 17th centuries, European nations exploring the globe by sea. It was characterized by commerce, colonialism, and imperialism. There are many factors for the causes of the age of exploration. It happened between the 15th and 17th centuries. Exclusively this part of the age of exploration, you could argue that it extended on even into the 20th century. But today we're going to be focusing on particularly the colonization of the Americas, particularly. We're also going to be touching on a little bit of Africa during this period and just kind of how all this impacts. So this happened between the 15th century and the 17th centuries. The time period we're going to be discussing today is going to be from the early 1400s through the 1770s. Now, today we're mostly going to be talking about just the age of exploration, not too much deep into the actual colonies themselves, because there's more to it than just the settlement of colonies, because there's the difference between discovering something and settling something. But we're going to get into all this. There was a big thing that happened, a shift in European society at the time to a economic system known as mercantilism. Mercantilism is a economic system that formed after feudalism in Western Europe, particularly during the time of the Age of Exploration, which is an economy characterized by commerce and settling new territories for resources, slave labor, things like that. We're going to talk all about, and it was a huge driving force in creating powerful governments, powerful monarchies, powerful nations, and created imperial nations. As you can see here, the Spanish Empire and the Portuguese Empire and the British Empire later on, the French Empire. We're going to learn all about these empires that developed from this idea of mercantilism, which is the progenitor of capitalism and the kind of successor to feudalism. But it was kind of in different. It was kind of the bridge between the two. But it was in different nations. Well, some nations were feudal still at this time. But mercantilism is a definition that is a vocabulary term that you should be familiar with because it characterized the age of exploration. Now, we got to talk about why it happened. And there are three main reasons why it happened. They're known as the 3Gs. Obviously, they're not this simple, but this is kind of a model that's famously used by historians to simply explain why the age of exploration happened, or the three driving forces for the age of exploration. Those being the 3Gs, like I said, gold, God, and glory. We're going to get into all of these later on in this stream, but they're all extremely important. Gold, also known as the search for resources and minerals, to increase the wealth of your nation, to supply your people with riches, to increase the quality of life, gold. And then we have God, the idea of expanding the Christian faith throughout the world, evangelism. In the Christian faith, Christians are called to, by Jesus Christ in the New Testament, to expand their faith throughout the nations of the world. And so when colonizing and occupying foreign territories, evangelism is going to play a huge part. And the spread of Christianity is going to play a huge part in these settlements and exploring the new worlds around the globe. And then also glory. It's not just these two things, but it's also geopolitical. Geopolitics are huge. When one nation gets involved, another one wants to as well to compete. The competition between nations for global dominance and for political and economic power is also at the hands of these nations. This is a huge factor. These are the three main factors, simplified into the three G's, which makes it sound kind of cool. But these are the three models for why the Age of Exploration happened. But there's a series of events that leads to it. One of the most influential is the fall of Constantinople in 1453. Now, the fall of Constantinople, for those of you guys that don't know, if you know your medieval history, your ancient or your Near East history, your European history, this is a very, very just important and consequential event that took place in the mid 15th centuries. The mid 15th century, sorry. There was only one 15th century. I guess there's a 15th century BC, but AD. 1453, the fall of Constantinople. So this plays a huge role in changing the economic and political climate of Europe at the time. And is typically seen as the end of the Middle Ages, or the period that we would call medieval times, which started with the fall of Rome in 476 AD. The successor of Rome, the Byzantine Empire, which existed in the east, since 476, had come to an end after a 1,000-year reign in the Balkans. And Constantinople, the city that was founded by Constantine the Great in the Roman Empire, fell to the Ottomans, the Ottoman Empire, also known as the Muslims. The Ottomans were the largest, most dominant Muslim state throughout this period. And the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople put an end to what we call the Middle Ages and led to a new age in society, and brings us into the Renaissance and the early modern period throughout world history, but particularly Western history. But we see this with the fall of Constantinople. The fall of Constantinople was had a huge negative impact on Europe, because Constantinople served as a political center and a center of trade for European nations, as Constantinople was the gateway to Asia and the gateway to the East that a lot of Europeans had never visited and didn't know a whole lot about at the time. But the Byzantine Empire is defeated by the Ottomans in 1453. This expands the need for items. And we're going to get to see how the fall of Constantinople affects the economic climate of Europe. This is a map of European trade routes around the year 1450. So this is about, 3 years before the fall of Constantinople. So we talk a lot about European history and the medieval times, and how when you study history at this time, a lot of nations didn't have a good idea about each other across the globe, and the mindset of what the Europeans knew about the world at this time was very slim to what it is today. So the 15th century is very consequential, but this is a map of the also, if you don't like maps in this video, or if you do like maps, that's awesome. But if you don't like maps in this video, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to get used to it, because this is going to be a lot of maps in this video, because it's just the easiest way to visually show, what happened. But learning history by map is key to, and cartography in general, is key to the Age of Exploration, because that was a big part of it. But anyway, this is a map of European trade routes around the year 1450. And then this is a map of Ottoman expansion. So the Ottoman Empire was founded in 1299, and it lasted until 1922. Um, it was disestablished after World War I, but it hit its peak around this time period. But as we can see, most of the trade networks are connected within Europe. And the networks that are connected to Asia and further east of Europe are all going through this area here. The Mediterranean, the Eastern Mediterranean, and the Black Sea. And Constantinople is right here on the border of the Black Sea. And Constantinople was conquered. It was a huge trade port for what we know as like the Silk Road, which was the route that was created in by the Han Dynasty of China back in BC period. It was created the Silk Road, which expanded, which is how the Europeans got stuff from China and Asia and things like that. And most Europeans had no idea where that was, but Constantinople was taken over by the Ottomans, and the Ottomans made it very expensive to ship products from Asia to Europe. And Europeans loved Asian products. Countries like China were providing, silk and porcelain and later on tea that Europeans loved, and they weren't able to trade anymore. Well, they could, but it was heavily taxed, and it was very expensive to do so. And this really the only other way you can go is Alexandria, Tripoli, and Carthage down here, which are in northern Africa, which are also going to be taken over by the Moors, and the Ottomans are going to expand into Alexandria in 1517. So the Muslim powers who are very against Europe, because Europe is dominantly Christian, Catholic to be specific, at this time. And so the Muslims and Christians are at a complete rivalry, religious rivalry that turns into an economic rivalry. And so they're making it expensive. And so once the Muslims control this area that are linking the trade routes from Asia to Europe, they're cut off and are very expensive to ship things in. So this is the map of the Ottoman Empire at 1450, just a couple years before Constantinople seized. They're going to expand all throughout this area. And then other Muslim powers, such as the Moors, are going to control this area of northern Africa. And at this time, the Reconquista is still going on in the Iberian Peninsula. And you have the Granada that exists, which is a Moorish Muslim state that exists in southern Spain that we're going to see later on get defeated. But the Muslims are expanding, and it has severe consequences on European trade with Asia specifically. So I talked about the lack of knowledge of the world in Europe at the time, especially compared to today. Now, one of the first really explorers to come out of Europe at the time was predated the age of exploration by quite a bit. It was a man named Marco Polo, who he lived from 1254 to 1324. And between the years 1271 and 1295, he set out on an expedition to Asia, being really the first European to do so. There are theories of Romans who had connected trade routes to places like China that had supposedly gone there, but no real records have really come out, and they're not as reliable. And they very well may have happened. But during this period, this Marco Polo is the original guy. Now, Marco Polo, for those of you guys that don't know, is actually a real person. As you can see, he's more than just the game you play in the pool. Marco Polo, yeah, that game. There's more to it than that. But I guess part of the reason why the game is, like you close your eyes when you play, is because Marco Polo he was exploring out into an area that was quite unknown by the Europeans at the time. He was from the Republic of Venice, which is in modern-day Italy. Italy at the time was split between many different states, but he was from the state of Venice, the Republic of Venice. And he set out on an expedition when he was 17 years old in 1271 to explore this area. This is shortly after the Mongol Empire was abolished. and destroyed, but it still kind of existed. And Genghis Khan's grandson and successor, Kublai Khan, was ruling the Yuan China and Mongolia and most of this area here today. Marco Polo went to, as you can see, he explored originally through this way up through Persia, down in this northern area, the Caspian Sea area, and ventured from Persia all the way through the Gobi Desert to China today, which was controlled by Kublai Khan, which he lived there for many years and served actually in the court of Kublai Khan. Now Marco Polo is more of like a mythical figure, probably. He definitely existed, but some of the stuff that he wrote is disputed by historians today. It just seems kind of out there. But he came back through the South China Sea, venturing down Southeast Asia into India and up and through back to the Persian Gulf and back through the Black Sea to Venice. So he made it back home. So he left when he was 17 and he came back when he was 31. So pretty crazy. His father was there and you know, when he did as well, and some others. But Marco Polo published writings about his trips to Asia, and these were taught to many scholars and people living in Europe throughout the next few centuries. And he talked about the culture of Asia, how vastly different it was, and he also talked about how China and some of these countries had riches that weren't available in Europe, and so it kind of gave it this like mythical and like sacred vibe to it, and led for a lot of stories, and people wanted to know more about this area and that the riches that Asia had, East Asia specifically, China, and these other countries. So Marco Polo serves as kind of a forefather for the want of products and the want of commerce with nations like China and India that we're going to see later on that prompt the age of exploration. And so when the Ottomans cut off the trade in Constantinople, European countries are going to want to they're trying to find other ways to Asia by sea, which had never really been done before. And so that's what we're going to see in this later on in the slideshow, this presentation. So before we get into the modern period as well, I want to just lay some more foundations here that the Europeans during this period of the Age of Exploration was not really the first time that Europe had dabbled with maritime exploring, and not even the first time they discovered the Western Hemisphere. It is highly believed, and evidence has shown this, that the Vikings, who existed as a medieval group, specifically originated in Scandinavia, places like Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, that explored many parts of the North Atlantic Ocean, the Baltics, and the North Sea, the English Channel, even down into the Mediterranean. So we see a map here of Viking explorations between roughly 700 AD and 1100 AD, which is around when they existed. But we can see here that they had many campaigns in Northern Europe. As we can see, they took over England many times. Canute the Great had the North Sea Empire in the early 11th century. They went down the Rhine River in Germany, modern-day Germany. Normandy, they settled there in France. They went down all the way down through the Iberian Peninsula, through the Strait here, into the Mediterranean, and pillaged places on the coast in France and Italy, and places like that. Sicily, they even made it to. Even going down these rivers into the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, supposedly. They were the first to discover Iceland and Greenland, and they eventually landed in Newfoundland, which is in modern-day Canada. A man named Leif Erikson around the year 1000 AD. So people like to claim that Christopher Columbus was the very first European to reach the Western Hemisphere and to reach the Americas. Well, it was actually the Vikings. It was Leif Erikson in the 1000s, and there's a statue of him in Reykjavik, Iceland today, commemorating that. But the Vikings were supposedly the very first people to reach this area of America. They set up a few camps, no permanent settlements, which allowed this fact and made this fact very unknown by a lot of people, that the Vikings did make it to America. Now keep in mind too that they're not the very first ones to get there. There are Native American tribes living all throughout these continents here. But the Vikings explored and raided different places. You can see your Ireland and the British Isles, all this stuff. They raided in all these different places. That was just kind of what they did. But they existed during the Middle Ages, kind of a warrior territory, but warrior culture. But they had actual settlements with rulers like Denmark, with Gorm the Old and Harold Bluetooth and all them, which is what Bluetooth is named after. But I'll do some videos in the future about the Vikings. And I have family members that just moved to Sweden, right across the bridge from Copenhagen, Denmark. So hopefully I can do some videos on that sometime, on-site Viking videos. Anyhow, let's get moving on. So let's first go ahead and talk about the Portuguese in West Africa. So the Portuguese were the first nation group to engage in maritime exploration, kicking off the Age of Exploration in the early 15th century. Portugal is the very first nation to kick off what we know as the Age of Exploration. Right here is a man named Prince Henry the Navigator, who lived from 1394 to 1460. He's going to be he's the son of, I believe, King Juan of Portugal. And he's going to be a huge proprietor of Portuguese exploration. Now, the Portuguese have been looking to find new ways to India and to Asia, but specifically India. And this is supposed to be the word of, not ode. But they had been looking to compete in northern Africa with the Muslims that had been ruling in North Africa and had controlled most of the trade routes at this time, as well as they keep expanding. As the golden age of Islam was around the Middle Ages. So they want to counter that. And then later on, when Constantinople falls, it becomes even more expensive and it's harder to get stuff to Portugal and to Europe in general. So they want to find new ways to Asia and to India specifically. India is their biggest goal. And they want to engage in the spice trade. Because spice plays a huge role in European, not only foods, but just the economy in general. People love it. All the different spices that come from Asia. And you can't get them in Europe. So, Portugal had been doing this well before trade was cut off by the Ottoman Empire. The very first time they send people out is in the early 1400s. 1415, we get the conquest of Ceuta, I'm not sure to pronounce that, in Morocco today. And then we get the discovery of the island of Madeira in 1420. And then the first cartographers go in and map the African coast in 1422. So throughout the 15th century, the Portuguese are exploring West Africa, trying to find new trade routes and trying to discover new things. And they eventually begin colonizing parts of it as well. 1444 is a very pivotal moment because the first African slaves are brought to Lisbon. Lisbon is the Portuguese capital. The Portuguese begin kidnapping African people in West Africa and bringing them against their will, forcing them to work for them in Lisbon, in their capital, and in their colonies. This is the start of what will later become known as the North Atlantic slave trade, and the slave trade that we're going to deal with in U.S. history until the 1860s, and then civil rights up through the 1960s, and even into today in some respects. But 1444 is a pivotal moment because that is when the Portuguese first enslave Africans. Later on, Pedro Escobar and João de Santarém they crossed the equator for the first time, being some of the first Europeans to do so in the year 1471. And then the Portuguese reached the Congo in 1482, and then Bartholomew Dias rounds the Cape of Good Hope in 1488, and the Portuguese had officially discovered the entire western part of Africa. So the goal was, we should be able to sail around Africa to get to India. And so that is what the Portuguese believe can happen. And it isn't until 1488 until, like 70 years after they first wondered this, that they finally reached the bottom of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa today. They also, during this period, discovered, Cape Verde and other things. So the islands on the west coast of Africa, and then basically the entire west coast of Africa, was explored at this time, really for the first time in European history. Very unknown land to them. So now we're going to talk about the discovery of the Cape of Good Hope, which I talked about previously in the last slide. So it was discovered by a man named Bartholomew Dias, who lived from 1450 to 1500. He was a Portuguese man, and this is kind of his route here on a map. So the Portuguese had discovered this entire area of Africa, this western part, and the Cape of Good Hope is down here. So now it's going to take them another 10 years to actually get to India, because they've reached the bottom of Africa, but where is India? And so Bartholomew Dias becomes one of the first Europeans, probably since Marco Polo, to actually reach the Indian Ocean. And so now it's going to take them about another 10 years to actually get to India. And they don't discover India until 1498. They're the very first country to discover India, which is in 1498. And then they're going to actually make their way to East Asia later on. But another nation, particularly Spain, has different plans. This brings us to Christopher Columbus. Now, Christopher Columbus has a different plan. Now, keep in mind, Christopher Columbus is speculating this. He makes his famous voyage to the Western Hemisphere, which he doesn't realize, in 1492. This is before the discovery. This is before the Portuguese had made it to India. Christopher Columbus has another idea. He's like, if the Earth is round, which a lot of people believed it was at the time, there were way more flat earthers back then, but most scholars and educated people at the time knew that the Earth was round based on just kind of how geography and astronomy and all that stuff worked. Most people knew the Earth was round. Columbus believed that instead of sailing around Africa to get to India, why don't we sail west and avoid everything? But avoid having to go underneath Africa. The reality was two things Christopher Columbus didn't know. First of all, it was going to take him way longer than he'd originally thought to get to India, and he underestimated the size of the Earth. He also had no idea there were two giant continents in between Europe and Asia, North America and South America, which no European knew existed at the time. And so he's going to be in for an awakening. So he goes to the Portuguese king and says, will you fund my voyage? I'm going to go west and discover India. It'll be quicker. The Portuguese king has concerns for a few reasons. The main reason is he believes Christopher Columbus has underestimated the size of the Earth, and that sailing west will take far longer. And also the Portuguese are already occupied in Africa, and they've already discovered the Cape of Good Hope. Now they just need to discover India, which they will do 6 years later. And so the Portuguese are going to trust with their African campaign, and they're not going to be interested in Christopher Columbus. This gives Christopher Columbus the perfect opportunity to go to Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, the dual ruling monarchs of Spain at the time, and for them to fund his trip. So Spain is in a really good spot right now. 1492 is a big year for Spain. Spain completes finally for their 700-year battle known as the Reconquista to kick the Muslims out of the Iberian Peninsula, which they successfully do in January of 1492. Columbus comes to them around August, around the summer of 1492. He leaves in August, comes back in October. But he says, will you fund my trip to the west to get to India? And the Spanish monarchs, who Spain had just been united, pretty much the crowns of Castile and Aragon, the two biggest states within Spain, in 1469. And then Spain's going to be officially formed around the 1510s. And Spain wants to compete with Portugal at this time, because if Portugal does make it to India, they're going to control it, all the trade, as the Portuguese are already establishing trading posts in Africa, on the West African coast. So Spain's a little worried about Portugal at this time. They want to compete with them. So they do end up funding Christopher Columbus's voyage to the Indies, the East Indies, or India and Asia in 1492. Christopher Columbus takes 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Very famous story. Christopher Columbus sails. He does 4 separate voyages, one in 1492, 1493, 1498, and then 1502 are all of his voyages, and he discovers many things. He first reaches the island on his first trip here in purple. He goes this way, and he first lands in the Bahamas, which he believes is the East Indies. And that is part of the reason why today that we know the Caribbean, which is the area that he settled in, are known as the West Indies. And Christopher Columbus, until the day he died, thought he was in the Indies, and he thought he had discovered that Asia could be reached from the west. He never knew that he made it and discovered America. He never knew. He never lived to see that, because that wasn't declared until 1507, the year after he died. He died in 1506. But he reaches the Bahamas, and then he goes down to Cuba, and then discovers the island of Hispaniola, and then eventually several other campaigns, eventually discovering the islands of Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and then also Dominica, and then Trinidad. And he claims all of them for Spain. And also in his last voyage, he ends up actually reaching Central America in the modern countries of Honduras, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and Panama. And he eventually reaches the coast of Suriname and Venezuela on his third voyage in 1498. After his first voyage, though, when he first discovers America, he doesn't realize he discovers America. Once he discovered the East Indies, he brings back with him gold that he discovers, other ancient artifacts, and some Native Americans, the Taino people, which was one of the most prominent tribes that lived in the Caribbean at the time, which we learned all about them in the last stream. So he brings them back, and the myth is, and I guess it's true, that the reason that Indians, that we call Native Americans or pre-Columbian peoples, Indians, is because Christopher Columbus thought he was in the East Indies, so he called them Indians. So thanks for that, Christopher Columbus. But he takes them back to Spain to prove that he has discovered Asia, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, Spain has discovered Asia. He didn't get to India, but he got to the Indies, which is the first step. First step. So that's what happens. Christopher Columbus also establishes the colony of Hispaniola in 1493, which is the very first European colony in the Western Hemisphere. Very influential. But like I said, Christopher Columbus doesn't know it. But he's playing a more major role than he thinks he has, which is interesting. One of the few times that's probably happened. Most historical figures probably overestimate what they've done, but Columbus actually underestimated what he did. So he reached the Caribbean, Western Hemisphere. He's just a very influential figure. He does 4 total voyages. His first voyage, obviously 3 ships. By the time he gets to his second voyage in 1493, just a year later, he brings 17 ships. But Columbus begins Spain's western route and look for India. But he doesn't realize he's in the East. Not in the East Indies, because most Europeans don't really know much about the East Indies at the time. Marlene, how are we feeling? Let's take a little breather here. I'm talking a lot. What do we think about Christopher Columbus, Marlene? I know you said you said his name in the chat. You knew his picture. The old famous line in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. He was originally from Italy, actually. He was not originally a Spaniard. Any comments, Marlene, on? Guess we'll move on. So, as we can see now, officially, Portugal and Spain are in a race to Asia, to India. And so, to avoid conflict with settlement and colonialism, this is so good, and enjoy all the new discovery. Yes, they treaty. Oh my gosh, Spain and Portugal signed the Treaty of Tordesillas, and a line is drawn right here. Keep in mind that they don't really know a lot of what's in each side of these lines. The original line was drawn actually by Pope Julius II to avoid conflict, but the Treaty of Tordesillas is signed in 1494. Very early on, which the Spain and Portugal agree, the Spanish and the Portuguese agree to terms that everything colonized west, everything discovered west of this line can be conquered and colonized by Spain, and everything east of the line gets to be colonized by Portugal. So essentially, Spain gets America and Portugal gets Africa, essentially, is what they believe here. And keep in mind, there are people living in Africa and America that have no say over this whatsoever. So that's something you got to keep in mind. How we doing, Bruno? Good to see you, sir. In the chat, we're talking about the age of exploration today. So this is the Treaty of Tordesillas. So it's a very pivotal moment in history. But keep in mind, the Spanish have no idea that the Americas exist. So it's essentially just the race to India at this time. But that's what happens. And this is kind of the reason that you see they had no idea how far South America reached, and so that's the reason that Portugal ended up with Brazil and no other part of the continent. And that's why Brazil to this day speaks Portuguese, because Portugal ended up discovering Brazil about 6 years later and colonized it because they realized that it was east of the line, which is interesting. This is still before we realized that America existed. So we see both countries, Portugal's trying to get to India from the southern part of Africa, and Spain's trying to get there from the west. So let's talk a little bit about the Portuguese Empire. So the Portuguese Empire was massive. It existed for many years. Just to kind of wrap up our talk with Portugal so we can focus a little more on America. Portuguese had one colony in America, Brazil. It is very fascinating, I agree. It's one of the most fascinating time periods. I'm excited to talk about it today. And if you guys got any questions or anything to add, please do. But the Portuguese Empire started in 1415, like I said. So Vasco da Gama, who is the very first Portuguese and European person to reach India by sea, does so in 1498. And so it's 6 years after Columbus had sailed, and it's 10 years after they discovered the Cape of Good Hope. So they finally realized they can go up the eastern coast of Africa to reach India. Now, Portugal and Spain have very different ideas of what it means to colonize and what purpose it is. So Spain mostly, especially when they get to America, they're colonizing for mostly imperial authority and to extract resources. Portugal is more on the commercial side of things. Mostly what they set up isn't just colonies, it's trading ports and things like that for also commercial purposes, but they're mostly for that. There's a few colonies they set up, specifically Brazil, which is discovered in 1500, probably to combat Spain because it's in South America, but they realize that it's east of the line of Tordesillas. They also settle in Angola and Mozambique, which are both in Africa today, in 1576 and 1502, respectively. Luanda is founded in 1576, which is the capital of Angola today, and Mozambique in 1502. They also colonize Cape Verde and Azores and Madeira, which are some islands up here. They also expand further. So they set up many different ports here along the Indian coast. Sri Lanka. We see some coasts here up in Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. And they also reach East Timor in Indonesia, parts of Indonesia, and then officially Japan in 1543. So the Portuguese had gone all the way up through this area in East Asia. They've gone all the way to East Asia. But there's still areas around here they haven't really discovered. And so they established a trading post at Nagasaki with the Japanese. Obviously, Nagasaki's most famous for having been bombed during World War II, but before that, it was an essential trading post for Japan. And that's discovered, set up in collaboration with the Portuguese in 1543. People don't realize how big a deal Portugal was. It's one of those overlooked nations. But in the early 1500s, in the late 1400s, Portugal dominated the freaking world, man. It's crazy. And also, unfortunately, one of their biggest impacts was being the forefather of the North Atlantic slave trade, which we're going to see later. The Portuguese, as they control Africa, are also controlling the importation of slaves, and this is going to be spread throughout their colonies, and eventually in Brazil, and once the Spanish settle more in America and even other nations like the English and the French and the Dutch, they're going to import slaves, African American or just African slaves to America to work forcefully against their will. And this is, like I said, a problem they're going to deal with for centuries. But it's a way to do commerce as cheap as possible, forcing people without pay to do it. It's pretty easy. So this is something that I found very interesting, and this is a discovery made in 1507 by Amerigo Vespucci, an Italian guy. He explores parts of the East Indies that Columbus had settled, and many other, and Spain sends many other missions to the west to try to find Asia. And eventually in 1507, Amerigo Vespucci, who explores parts of the area and maps it all out here, this is one of his maps that he made, comes to the realization that Columbus did not reach the East Indies, and that the Spanish explorers were not in Asia, and that in fact there was an entirely new continent between them that was discovered. And so that is where America gets its name, after Amerigo. It was made to be more, like Latinized to America, but the name is derived from. How many of you guys knew that America is named after some Italian guy from the 1500s? Yeah, most people didn't know that, but that's why America is called America, because this guy was the first man to realize that they were in a new continent. And so Christopher Columbus died the year before. Christopher Columbus died never knowing that he discovered America. So it's very interesting. But he ended up dying in 1512. But this is an early map that he had. This is what he believed the continent looked like at the time. As we can see, we have Florida, and we have, this part, and that it's all linked. And yeah, no idea how thick it is. They don't know. But this is their idea. As you can see, their map of Asia is quite questioning as well. But anyway, that's Amerigo Vespucci, the namesake of America. So now we are going to get to colonialism and imperialism within the Spanish Empire. So we talked a little about the Portuguese Empire. Now I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the Spanish Empire, because the Spanish Empire is really what's going to dominate in America and in what we're concerned with here in this video. So obviously, you have the main part of Spain. This is the Spanish Empire at its peak. This is its land territory. And it is able to conquer all of this land through imperialism and colonialism, which are essentially the same words. Colonialism is more to extract minerals and to settle, whereas imperialism is more to expand an empire, which they go hand in hand. But we see that they had spread all the way from the southern tip of Argentina and South America all the way up through modern-day Alaska at one time, at their peak. It obviously took them many decades and centuries to do this. And then they also controlled the Philippines as well over here, and the Caribbean. But basically everything besides Brazil, because that's what's controlled by Portugal. But that's the Spanish Empire. So how do they do it? Let's find out. So I'm now going to show you guys we're going to go through some different explorers that existed in Spain at the time that the Spanish had sent to explore the New World, also known as America. Both the Americas, the Caribbean, North and South America. And so I'm just going to go through the most revolutionary ones, the ones that made the most influential discoveries as Spain is really the only nation that's really here right now doing things. So they can kind of do whatever they want to do. And the Treaty of Tordesillas allows for it, and Portugal endorses it. So, allows for it at least, because they're staying away from each other. But Juan Ponce de Leon is a very influential guy. And most of these guys, the average person probably hasn't heard of, but they're very important. He created the settlement of San Juan in Puerto Rico in 1508 and served as the governor of Puerto Rico from 1508 to 1511. He also was the man who discovered the Gulf Stream in the modern-day Gulf of Mexico, which was, or Gulf of America, whatever, to allow travel to be much quicker. He also discovered Florida at the time. In 1513, Juan Ponce de Leon is considered to be the very first, not only Spaniard, but the first European to reach what is now the United States, discovering the Florida Peninsula in 1513. While he's in Florida, though, he is killed by Calusa natives, the Calusa native tribe. He's attacked by them, and then he goes to Cuba, Havana, Cuba, which is where he ends up dying in 1521 from his wounds. He's only in his 40s at the time, but a lot of these early pioneers and explorers are going to die young, and they're going to die in gruesome ways. Well, it's just one of those things. So his main base is in Puerto Rico, and so he discovers Florida. What he's mainly known for is discovering Florida and being the founder of San Juan, Puerto Rico. So very, very interesting. He's buried in San Juan as well. Marlene in the chat actually has been to Juan Ponce de Leon's grave, haven't you, Marlene? Marlene, I want to ask your opinion. What do you think about Juan Ponce de Leon? Because you know a little bit about him. See what she has to say. Yes, a very great man. Interesting. Okay. Very controversial to say, Marlene. Very controversial. Whether or not he was a good man or not, he was very influential in settlement and the creation of the Spanish Empire. So keep in mind, it's just Spain. Spain is dominating. So this is another Spaniard, Alonso Alvarez de Pineda. He was very, very young when he died. So he is the first person to map the Gulf Coast. So he sails, starting actually in Jamaica. He sails from Jamaica all the way up through Florida, all the way through the Gulf Coast, and eventually to modern-day Corpus Christi in Texas. So he discovers Louisiana and Texas, and is the first person to realize that Florida, and discover that Florida is actually connected to a greater continent, a greater North America. Because people had originally believed that Florida may be an island, kind of like Cuba. But he also discovers the Mississippi River, which dumps into the Gulf of Mexico, so he's very influential for that. He's killed actually at age 25 in Mexico by the Huastec natives. So another explorer who's killed by natives. And this just goes to show the native mindset at the time. The indigenous tribes of the Americas want nothing to do with these Europeans who are coming in and infringing upon their land and everything like that. He does this route in 1519, by the way. So just a little bit after Juan Ponce de Leon reaches Florida in 1513, but he dies at age 25. So that's Alonso Alvarez de Pineda, the first man to discover Texas as well, which is pretty influential. And then we're going to see some guys go up the Rio Grande, and then that's going to be a good a good segue into reaching the Pacific, and then later the Pacific coast of Mexico and the United States today. So Hernando de Soto is next that we're going to be talking about. So he was the first man to map the southeastern United States, modern today. He covered about 4,000 miles on his trek, looking for gold and things like that. He found no gold. For those of you guys that don't know, there's not really the southeast United States, the Carolinas, Georgia, Tennessee. They're not known for their gold. That's just something to know. But he was famous for having enslaved many Native Americans on his way up through here. There are many different native tribes that lived in this area. He was also a conquistador of the Inca Empire in Peru. He helped out with the capturing of Emperor Atahualpa, who is the last emperor of the Incas, which we're going to learn more about later in this video. He was a contemporary to Francisco Pizarro, who was the main conquistador who conquered the Inca Empire down in Peru. He also served as governor of Cuba for a time, and he died from a fever while he was on one of his treks in the southeastern United States. And they actually buried his body in the Mississippi River, which is very interesting. That'd be really fascinating. I don't know if this actually happened, but if somebody were able to actually find his bones. Let me see if they have. I'm actually going to look that up. That's a very interesting. Have Hernando de Soto's, this is a fun fact, bones been discovered? I have not. He died in 1542, likely near the Mississippi River. Artifacts have been found, but it said his body hasn't been found. So this was an expedition that he did from 1539 to 1543. So this was after the conquest of the Inca Empire, which was in South America. So he's really the first guy to explore the modern southeast U.S. Like you can see here, it's kind of cut off at the top, but he goes through many different states. I mean, today, Florida, you see here, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Tennessee, the Carolinas, Virginia. I mean, he's everywhere. I mean, that's crazy. 4,000 miles in 4 years he trekked. That's 1,000 miles a year. It's completely unknown land. How cool would that have been, man? So now we're going to talk about Vasco Nunez de Balboa, who lived from 1475 to 1519. He also died relatively young in his 40s. Granted, the average lifespan back in the early 16th century was pretty low anyway. But he's the first European to discover the Pacific Ocean. The first European to reach the Pacific Ocean in the year 1513, as you can see here. So he discovers the Isthmus of Panama down here, which actually connects the two oceans of the Atlantic and the Pacific, technically through a route. He's also known for having founded Santa Maria la Antigua, which is the first permanent settlement in mainland America, which was in 1510, I believe in modern-day Panama. The very first mainland settlement. Previously, before 1510, prior to 1510, all the colonies had been in the Caribbean islands. But you can see he does all this to reach his Columbia. Very cool portrait. Seas on the sea and everything. So now we are going to get Ferdinand Magellan. Now, Ferdinand Magellan's very famous. Now, Ferdinand Magellan's going to answer the question of, okay, we've made it to America, okay, but are we going to get to Asia? We still need to get to Asia, guys. So he discovers that. So he is the very first human being to circumnavigate the globe, or the Earth, same thing. He's basically the first guy to sail all the way around the world and prove that the Earth was round, finally, basically proving that. There's only one bad thing, though, about him. He actually didn't live to see it. His voyagers, his crew made it back, some of them, but he ended up dying actually in the Philippines. But he discovered the Philippines and claimed it for Spain. And it was eventually named after King Philip of Spain. So Philippines have a lot of Spanish influence. I think that's kind of sad that the country of the Philippines is named after the former king of Spain from the 16th century. But anyway, that's how it is. But you know, he discovered the Strait of Magellan. So he sails all the way down the Atlantic coast of South America, discovers the Strait of Magellan, was named after him, down here that you could get through. And he ended up going to the Philippines. He dies here in 1521 at the age of 41. Then his crew manages to come back down below the Cape of Good Hope, back up to Spain. So they do make it home. But Magellan doesn't live to see it. Magellan, he's killed by Filipino chief Lapu-Lapu's army, his resistance on Mactan Island in 1521. So Ferdinand Magellan's the first man to circumnavigate the Earth, but he doesn't actually live to see it. He is also commissioned by Spain. Similarly to Christopher Columbus, he actually tries to get Portugal to fund his voyage, but they again say no to it. Yeah, so let's continue on. I find it funny too, and I was going to bring this up earlier in the video, but I find it funny how the Europeans love Asian spices and all this stuff, and they want to trade with the Asian cultures like China and India. But China, specifically China, wants really nothing to do with European products. It reminds me of in 1796 when King George III of Britain sends an ambassador to Beijing and China, trying to negotiate with Qianlong Emperor of the Qing dynasty for like a negotiation to trade, and Qianlong Emperor's like, we don't want anything to do with European products, we don't care about them. So it's interesting because it's one-sided, because the Europeans really want Asian products, but Asians don't want European products. So it's kind of like a one-sided thing. I just kind of thought that was funny and kind of ironic that these guys are so into wanting to trade with Asia. So now we're going to talk about Francisco de Orellana. I think this is one of the last ones. But he is influential for being the first Spaniard and the first person to navigate the entirety of the Amazon River, which the Amazon River is the biggest river in the Western Hemisphere. I believe it's the biggest in the world. Maybe next to the Nile, but I think it's the biggest in the world. Or maybe the Yellow River in China. I don't know. It's definitely top 3. But it's very, even today, very dangerous place. But you can only imagine back then what probably looked about the same. But he's the first guy to do that in 1542. He ends up dying in 1546, age of 35. South America. So now we have one of the more famous explorers, Hernan Cortez. So he's famous for having been a conquistador, which is the Spanish word for conqueror. So he's the first of all, his discoveries. He was the first to explore Baja California and discovered what is known today as the Sea of Cortez, named after him. And so he appeared through the Rio Grande here, which is, well, not the Rio Grande, actually, Veracruz. This river, the Rio Grande, is up here. Gulf of Mexico, comes back around and discovers the Aztec Empire that exists in the city of Tenochtitlan, which is the largest city in pre-Columbian America. And he decides he's going to conquer them because they have a lot of gold that Hernan Cortez wants. Like we said, the entirety of this area was covered in native people that existed at the time, and Hernan Cortez finds a huge empire that he wants to conquer. And then he eventually, after he conquers the Aztecs in 1521, he founds New Spain officially. And then the city of Mexico City comes out of Tenochtitlan. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the Aztecs. I think it's an important thing to have a segment of this stream about the native people, particularly the Aztec Empire, because of the atrocities that were committed. Now, a lot of people think Hernan Cortez just went in and killed everybody via war. That was not the case. There are many other factors involved. Hernan Cortez had strategies of marrying like the daughter of Emperor Montezuma, who this guy is, to kind of work his way up in establishing an alliance to kind of make diplomatic agreements to get what he wants, in addition to waging war. But also the main reason that the Aztec died, and we can see here 25% of the population died from smallpox. And that's going to be one of the biggest things that plays a role in the deteriorating populations of not just the Aztecs in Central America, but also the tribes of North America and South America. European diseases that they're not immune to. The Europeans are coming over bringing different diseases that are exclusive to Europe that there is no immunity to in the Americas. And so these native people are going to die of these diseases very quick. It's going to spread like a wildfire. So 25%, 1 in 4 people die of smallpox in the Aztec Empire. Just horrible. I mean, I've never had smallpox, and smallpox doesn't really exist anymore. But I can't imagine it's too much fun, especially because you can die of it. But in addition to this, the Spanish stole gold from the Aztec Empire, wiped out by the Spanish army, and the collapse led to the founding of Mexico City and subsequently New Spain. But the Aztec Empire had existed since the 1300s in modern New Mexico. And Tenochtitlan, which is the city here, they're famous for Tenampas, which we talked about Marlene. One of Marlene's favorite parts of pre-Columbian America, the floating gardens that the Aztecs created. That city was the capital of the Aztec Empire, and it was conquered by Hernan Cortez and subsequently the rest of the empire. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into the Aztec Empire. One of the videos that I have planned today, let me go back, is actually the rise and fall of the Aztec civilization. So even if you watched the last video, you can still learn a little bit about the Aztecs. So this is going to be a little bit about the conquest. It's only a 3-minute video. Let's go ahead and play it.
The year was 1300.
It is loud.
Originally a nomadic people who called themselves the Mexica.
Is that too loud, Marlene? Mexica.
Were looking for a new home in what is now Mexico. Their decision wasn't arbitrary.
I mean, take a look at this. They were very skilled. People have this notion and this mindset that native people were very primitive and that they just were not intelligent, which is not true at all. I mean, look at the art and architecture that they built. It's incredible.
Now Mexico. Their decision wasn't arbitrary. They were waiting for a sign. Arbitrary.
Like, look at these pyramids they built.
They were waiting for a sign. A divine one at that. According to the Aztec
So this is the mythical, legendary founding of the Aztec Empire, of this hawk eating a snake on top of a cactus.
tradition, the travelers saw an eagle on an island in a lake. But this was no ordinary eagle. It sat on top of a cactus, clutching a snake in its beak.
And that is actually the inspiration for the modern design of the Mexican flag. These people are called the Mexica. So that's where Mexico gets its name. In the Mexican flag, you can see the eagle with the snake. That's what it's referenced to.
Interpreting this event as a sign from the god Huitzilopochtli, the Aztecs set up camp on the marshlands of Lake Texcoco. Here, they established Tenochtitlan, the capital of their empire.
So Tenochtitlan became the largest city. It's what we now know as Mexico City. Became the largest city in pre-Columbian America. It is estimated to have had a population maybe as high as 300 to 500,000 people, which is incredible. That's good. When I was a little boy, oh, Kenneth Huber's in the chat. When I was a little boy, my dad would read me books about the Age of Exploration. It's what sparked my love of history and also made me want to join the Navy. Sick. Yeah, it's a very, very interesting period. It's one of my favorites as well. And it's very important, and a lot of people don't know a whole lot about it. It often gets, simplified in American education, which we talked about earlier in this video. There's also another misconception about the Aztecs, that people think they had existed for like thousands of years. No, the Aztec Empire was founded in like 1300, only like 200 years before. I mean, the Aztec Empire was younger than the United States is now by the time it was conquered by the Spanish. Yeah, look at this.
Gardens to impressive architecture to freshwater aqueducts, the Aztec capital was a marvel of urban planning.
I mean, look at this. This is not primitive by any means. This is incredible.
If you'd visited Tenochtitlan at its height, you would have been awed.
What's going on, Mom?
By the Templo
My mom's here, guys.
A religious and cultural hub, the temple underwent at least 7 major expansions, becoming a stately landmark of the empire.
So
All
cool.
across the city, you'd find chinampas, which
These are the chinampas, Marlene, that we were talking about.
were built by inserting stakes into the lake bed and filling the gaps between them with mud and other materials. Chinampas were used to grow a variety of crops and allowed for year-round cultivation and multiple harvests. Under the
How
leadership
unique.
of skilled rulers like Itzcoatl and Moctezuma I, the Aztecs expanded their influence through military conquests and strategic alliances. Their empire flourished, dominating much of central and southern Mexico by the early 16th century.
Mm-hmm.
Human sacrifice played a significant role in Aztec religious beliefs, but historians debate the extent and frequency of this practice. Scholars generally agree that sacrifices were conducted to appease the gods, ensure fertility of the land, and commemorate important events. Victims, often prisoners
Mm-hmm.
of war, were ritually killed in elaborate ceremonies.
And it was seen by many in these ancient cultures, and the Mayans did it too. And the Inca to some extent, but they were mostly sacrificing animals and belongings like items, but and food. But a lot of the Aztec people and the Mayans really believed that it was an honor to be sacrificed as your blood was going to the gods. It was the most honorable way to die, and people would gather around and watch it. It was a huge thing, and people saw it as an honor. It's not like, oh, no, I don't want to be sacrificed. No, it was an honor to most people because that's what they believed.
Until 1519,
Boy.
Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés.
So we just talked about him, Hernan Cortez, discoverer of Baja California, and yeah, conquer the Aztecs.
Arrived in the Aztec capital. The invaders were initially welcomed by the Aztec leader Moctezuma II, who thought Cortés might be the god Quetzalcoatl.
Oh, you can't hear the video? Okay. Thank you for that.
Taking advantage of this false belief, Cortés seized Moctezuma and held him captive at his own palace,
Can you hear it now? I was working on it earlier and it was too loud.
effectively
Let me see. I think you can now. Yeah, I didn't have it turned up. Sorry about that, guys.
taking control of the empire through
Now
the
you can't
figurehead
hear it.
ruler. Moctezuma's captivity lasted until 1520 when he was killed, possibly by his own people during an uprising against the Spanish. In 1521, after months of brutal warfare, Tenochtitlan fell to the Spanish, marking the end of the Aztec Empire.
It's true. Yeah, and so from there they established Mexico City, that we now know as, and New Spain was the term was officially coined, which started the Spanish Empire, which dominated the world at the time. And so, yeah, it's just sad to see, and they didn't touch on this too much, but smallpox, like we talked about, was part of the reason that everyone died. 25% of the population died from smallpox, just because they weren't immune to the European diseases. So
Language have shaped the landscape of the region.
Scotch
Elements of
wine.
Aztec innovation, including the sustainable use of chinampas, persist today.
Oh wow.
You can even spot an eagle sitting on a cactus
Yep.
with a snake in its mouth on the Mexican flag.
Exactly. So that's cool. And there's a lot of like the old like ancient Aztec like dialect, that language that people like still can speak, and it's like been passed down to today, like this like phenomenon. It's like really interesting. So let's get back to the presentation. So that is the Aztec Empire. So we're going to move on to the other major conquistador of New Spain. Yes, very good. So Francisco Pizarro. So Francisco Pizarro was the conqueror of the Incas, which the Incas were really the second main ancient empire that had existed in America at the time. So they were a little further south. They were in what is now Peru in the Andes Mountains specifically. It's now on like the Pacific coast, so that's where they got there. There was the famous town of Machu Picchu in the cliffs of the Andes Mountains. I really want to go there someday, but it's really cool. Like I said, we talked about this in the last video. So he was really one of the first settlers to explore the Pacific coast of South America. In the process, conquered the Inca Empire in 1533. Although it wasn't officially conquered until 1572. He ends up establishing the city of Lima, which today is the capital of Peru. He's killed there about 8 years later by a rival who had helped him conquer the Inca Empire. He sent a man or somebody on his behalf went and killed Pizarro, and he's Pizarro for that reason is kind of seen as kind of like a mythical figure in the age of exploration, for like, what could he have done had he not died? But you could say that about most of the explorers that died young. So that's him. So I also had a video. This is about the Incas, because I want to give more of a focus to the ancient civilizations, the pre-Columbian civilizations. This is a good thing we can hear now, because this video is longer. This video is 13 minutes. It's about it's made by Kings and Generals. Kind of showing a view of the conquest of the Inca Empire. Smallpox was the very first vaccine in 1796. Yes, that is quite a long time after this period. So that goes to show how long it was dealt with as a problem, and it was even a problem after that. So was the last Commander would know this, the last like positive smallpox case like in the 1970s. I'm actually going to look it up. Smallpox case. 77 in Somalia. So, yeah, interesting. So now we're going to watch Kings and Generals video on the conquest of the Inca Empire. And this is going to be very insightful. Actually, let me go back to the presentation real quick. I got to finish what I was talking about. So, fall of the Inca Empire, it's a similar case. The Inca Empire is significant because they were actually, geographically speaking, the largest pre-Columbian empire that existed. The Aztecs were the largest by population, had the biggest cities, but the Incas had the largest land area. So they actually were very influential because they had connected like trade routes and roads through the entire empire here, which made the conquest of the Inca Empire to be so difficult. And the land was in most of the Andes Mountains, and so it's just very hard to fight a war in that terrain. By the time the Europeans arrived, the Incas were experiencing a brutal civil war of succession to the throne of the Inca Empire. And the emperor at the time was Atahualpa, who was captured and executed by the Spanish in 1533. And then the Inca Empire didn't officially fall until 1572, over 30 years after Pizarro died. But they were one of the last major resistances. But after 1533, there's pretty much no chance for them. But they pretty much consisted of the entire Pacific coast here of South America. So absolutely huge. I think they formed around the same time as the Aztecs. So they only existed for a few hundred years. The other major civilization that people like to talk about are the Mayans. The Mayan civilization didn't contact Europeans because they actually had ceased to exist before the Europeans arrived, and no one really knows why. It's one of the biggest mysteries. Could have been crop failure, climate change, or maybe a civil war caused them to get divided up like the Olmecs did. But this is one of those things. So let's go ahead and talk about, let's watch this video on the conquest of the Inca Empire. 13 minutes. Let's get it going. Here we go. Kings and Generals. Very good YouTube channel.
500 years ago, atop the snow-capped Andes, in a still barely mapped continent, thousands of meters above sea level, two new empires smashed into each other in a historical collision that reverberates into the modern day.
It's true.
Conquistador and Sapa Inca, men from different worlds, will clash. The Arquebus and Huayraca will meet, and Tahuantinsuyu, the land of four parts together, will be undone.
That's right.
In 1528, Hernán Cortés had just returned from Mexico, bringing tales of conquest along with unimaginable treasures.
Yeah, that's one of the big things Cortés did after conquering the Aztecs was take all their gold.
Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain, Charles V, received him as...
Yeah, so Charles V, talk about him. I was going to bring him up earlier. I almost had a whole slide about it, but I ran out of time and couldn't have it. But Charles V was so freaking powerful. This guy was the Holy Roman Emperor and the King of Spain, which for a time he controlled also parts of Italy as well. So he controlled the Low Countries, Germany, which is the Holy Roman Empire. His grandfather was the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian. He was part of the House of Habsburg, and he also inherits the throne of United Spain. So he controls all of Spain, he controls all of Germany, the Low Countries, Italy, and also the Spanish Empire in America. This guy controls probably more land than anybody had since Rome, which is insane. Think about that. That's insane. Anyway, powerful guy. I just had to say that.
And his riches in Toledo. As Cortés impressed the royal court, another veteran of the New World arrived at the city. It was Francisco Pizarro, the second cousin of Cortés.
That's true. That's true. I forgot to mention that they were related.
Pizarro had arranged to meet the king and planned to impress him with gifts: gold, silver, feathers.
Yes, he was extremely interesting. One of the most powerful monarchs to ever exist.
Natives and bizarre creatures unknown outside of the Andes. Pizarro told his king of the magical land of Peru, home to a native empire that Pizarro assured him could be conquered in his name. On the 26th of July 1529, Pizarro was issued a royal license to conquer this new land and named the governor of Peru. Armed with a royal permission, Pizarro set off recruiting potential conquistadors. He returned to his hometown of Trujillo, gathered his 4 brothers, Juan, Francisco, Gonzalo, and Hernando, and then set sail for the Americas in January 1530.
Panama we got an ad. Oh, Panama City.
Can be you.
Florida. Juan Ponce de Leon.
The longer the walk on the beach, the shorter the
This is not a
workweek
sponsor.
feels.
This is
Panama
not a
City
sponsor,
Beach.
guys.
Make it yours at the Real Fun Beach.
Shopping is hard. Make
We
it
gotta
easy
give
with
Kings
Stitch
and Generals some revenue
Get
for
outfits
this.
you love without any of the hassle. First,
The Sapa Inca Huayna Capac had recently subdued much of what is now Ecuador, when reports began trickling in. Strange men had traded with the city of Tumbes. Alongside these reports came others that were much more horrific.
One of the things that is notable, especially when we think of the Aztecs, I'm not sure what the Inca mindset was on this, but when the Spanish came, especially to the Aztecs, the arrival almost was like a holy experience, like that they believed the Spanish were gods because they were coming in with armor they had never seen before and horses that they had never seen before, and just thought they were some like mythical creatures from the realm of heaven or whatever. And so that was kind of a reason that they were so mysterious and they were in awe by their presence. That was the Aztec mindset. I don't know as much about the Inca mindset. I assume it was probably similar in many ways. But they were undergoing civil war at this time, and the Inca were in politically a worse situation.
Runners arrived daily, informing the Sapa Inca that a disease had appeared in the north and was killing thousands.
So that's kind of how they realized it.
Nothing like it had ever been seen before.
Smallpox.
Plagues were unknown to the Inca, so this strange sickness, known to us as smallpox, ravaged the population. The Eurasian disease was not brought by Pizarro, however, as it arrived slightly before he did, creeping in from North and Central America. In the following years,
because there had been colonies in Panama in that area.
90% of the empire would succumb to the disease.
90%.
Sometime around 1527, the Sapa Inca Huayna Capac and his heir died from smallpox alongside millions of their subjects.
It's true.
2 years before.
Yeah, you weren't here at the time, Commander, but we talked a lot about Portugal, the Portuguese Empire. Yeah, it is amazing how much they've fallen over time.
Before Pizarro had
And they
petitioned
controlled
the King of Spain.
basically the entire world, like, half the world was controlled by either Spain or Portugal around this time.
Eurasian Germs had initiated the conquest for him. With the succession now unclear and the realm divided, the sons of Huayna Capac both tried to claim the throne and tossed the empire into chaos.
War of Succession.
Atahualpa, who possessed much less territory than Huáscar, controlled his dead father's veteran legions and slowly pushed down from Quito towards Cusco. During the final bloody climax of the war in 1532, Huáscar's remaining armies were smashed outside of Cusco and he was captured by Atahualpa's generals. Atahualpa was camped over 900 kilometers away in the town of Cajamarca with a small portion of his army awaiting news of the battle. Even with the Incas'
So Atahualpa was the famous leader against the Spanish.
And their tireless chess keys, it would take 5 days for word of the victory to reach Atahualpa. There, in Cajamarca, Atahualpa planned his eventual coronation as the supreme ruler of the Inca world. He was eager to get word from his generals and set off on his victory march towards his new capital. But there was just one small detail that he needed to deal with at the moment. Reports were coming in from his chiefs that a small band of 168 foreigners, some of whom were riding giant llamas, was causing havoc on the coast.
Giant
and
llamas.
It appeared they were now marching straight for Cajamarca.
Interesting.
Atahualpa was curious, and rather than have these men killed, he decided to see them and their strange llamas himself. What could 168 do against his 50,000 soldiers? He had agreed to meet the Spaniards in the central plaza of Cajamarca. This was a ceremonial meeting between his vast empire and some lowly visitors. So, on Saturday, November 16th, 1532, Atahualpa entered the square at Cajamarca, followed by 6,000 of his barely armed men. A battle was not expected. Atahualpa was quite confident.
This is kind of interesting, but what I'm thinking about the way that this war is fought. It's kind of similar to the Vietnam War in a way, where it's like it's a civil war. It's two different, not really ideologies, but two different sides fighting each other for dominance in the region, and also a war against an outside force, which was kind of what Vietnam was, where you had the French trying to fight to take back their colony, whereas the Vietnamese people want their independence, and then they're fighting each other. It's an ideological war at the same time. So this Inca situation is similar in certain respects.
As just the day before he had heard of his victory at Cusco and the capture of his rival brother Huáscar. So this was a day of celebration. Once he had had his meeting with this odd band of foreigners, he could march south and have his glorious coronation. Pizarro and his men had planned to
visualizing
emulate Cortés.
things.
They would capture Atahualpa, thus cutting off the head of the Inca Empire and paralyzing it. Atahualpa, as Sapa Inca, was supreme ruler of the empire, and it could not function without him. Pizarro had hidden his men in the buildings surrounding the square, and stationed the artillery and arquebuses on the far side of the square, ready to fire. Like too many fans in a tiny football stadium, the Inca troops crowded into the square, which had only two narrow exits.
Booking.com has
Oh,
all
come
kinds of
on.
stays because some
This guy
love a
loves
rustic cabin.
ads.
Others feel differently. Find exactly what you're booking for. Booking.com, booking.yeah.
Rip. Again, not sponsors. Alright, let's continue.
Not a single Spaniard could be seen. As the sun began to set, nothing could be heard in the square except for a slight breeze. The fear inside the stone buildings was incalculable. Pedro Pizarro said, "I heard that many Spaniards urinated on themselves without noticing it from sheer terror."
Wow.
Eventually, two men
Wonder how true
appeared
that
from the
is.
buildings and approached Atahualpa. Vicente de Valverde, a Dominican friar, and an inexperienced native translator. The friar read the following to Atahualpa. I request and require you to recognize the Church as your mistress and as governess of the world and universe. And if you do not do this, with the help of God we shall come mightily against you, and we shall make war on you everywhere and in every way that we can, and we shall subject you to the yoke and obedience of the Church and His Majesty, and we shall seize your women and children, and we shall make them slaves to sell and dispose of as His Majesty commands.
Yeah, this is something that, as somebody who is a Christian, it ticks me off because it's one of those things where we talk about God, glory, and gold, the three G's, the reason why the Age of Exploration happened, and evangelism and trying to spread Christianity around the world. And that's part of the reason that a lot of South America today is Catholic, and many regions that used to be part of Spain are Catholic, is because Spain was a strongly Catholic country, and they spread Christianity to all these people. Well, it has its consequences because the way that they are doing it is not peaceful like they're called to. It's sinful, and it's forceful, and it's like it's culture erasing, and it's not a good way. But that's why we see kind of this impact of Latin American nations being Catholic today. And I mean, our last Pope Francis was from Argentina. I mean, this kind of thing still persists. Not in this forceful manner, but this impact still can be seen today, and it's a very interesting thing. And evangelism for the Christian faith is an essential part of it. It's just the way that you do it. It's just not this, man. It's not
we
this.
shall do all the evil and damage to you that we are able. And I must insist that the deaths and destruction that result from this will be all your fault.
Well, he's making it threatening to him, so
this
at least
was
there's
the
that.
Requerimiento, a document read aloud to the native peoples of the New World, informing them of Spain's divine right to conquer these lands in the name of God.
Divine rights.
Valverde then approached Atahualpa and offered him a Bible. Atahualpa had heard reports of the men's fascination with these objects, but he had no way to contextualize what this was or how to interact with it. He had had enough with these foreigners now, and their disrespect for the Inca diplomatic customs. Atahualpa scolded Valverde for the Inca diplomatic customs. Enough with these foreigners now, and their disrespect for the Inca diplomatic customs.
That's fair.
Atahualpa scolded Valverde and the Spanish for stealing from warehouses and killing Inca chiefs, and proceeded to toss the book aside. Valverde, horrified at this perceived act of extreme blasphemy, sprinted towards the stone buildings, shouting, "Come out!
Blasphemy.
Come out, Christians!
Blasphemy. Yeah, this is just really
Come at these enemy dogs who reject the things of God!" The square again fell silent. With loud roars, the cannons and arquebuses soon fired directly into the mass of warriors, spewing out smoke and metal shrapnel. Inca soldiers, shocked by the sounds, soon saw beasts riding towards them. The Spanish war cry, Santiago, was screamed as men rushed out of the buildings. A massacre ensued as the panic-stricken Inca force tried to retreat out of the tiny square.
Santiago, that was
Dazed
the
masses of soldiers ran for
war
the narrow
cry.
exits. It was impossible to escape. Thousands died, trampled under their comrades or horses. Chopping through the men holding the royal litter, Pizarro and his men grabbed Atahualpa and dragged him back into one of the stone buildings. Just that morning, he was basking in a victory that took 4 years to complete. Atahualpa was now, at sunset, prisoner to an unknown group of people.
Wow.
The Inca Empire, which only just finished a destructive civil war, was now involved in the highest stakes hostage situation of all time.
Wow.
The survivors of the massacre ran from the square, and the rest of the Inca army, now leaderless,
Spanish Inquisition comes to mind. It's one of
Atahualpa noted the excitement
our
the
favorite
Spaniards had at
memes as
finding
historians.
gold trinkets amongst the wreckage. He concluded that these were pirates from
It's
some
related in
faraway
Spain.
land. If he could give them enough gold, then they would return to their ships and be gone. He told Pizarro that in exchange for his life and freedom, he would fill the room they were in with gold and twice over with silver. Atahualpa delivered on his promise. For months, with life and freedom, he would fill the room they were in with gold, and twice over turn to their ships and be gone. He told Pizarro that in exchange for his life and freedom, he would fill the room they were in with gold, and twice over with silver. Atahualpa delivered on his promise. For months, the greatest treasures and artifacts of the Inca Empire poured into Cajamarca. The room was filled, and everything was melted down into ingots, which is why gold or...
You know, what's very interesting, too, is once these civilizations are conquered, and the means of production for silver and gold and the mining of it all, since Spain's the only country that's in this area at the time, they control all of that. And most of the gold and silver that's being produced in the world is coming out of this area. Spain controls all of that. And so they're going to ship it around to countries around the world. They're going to ship it back to Europe. They're going to ship it to China. They're going to ship it to the Middle East. It's going to go everywhere. And Spain's going to control that entire trade, which makes them very powerful.
Silver Inca artifacts are
so rare
some
high demand places.
In the end, the gold totaled 1.3 million pesos de oro, or around 400 million 2018 US dollars, to be divided between the 168 men and the King of Spain. As the ransom poured in, so did more Spanish troops. Diego de Almagro, Pizarro's business partner, arrived with an extra 153 men. The fact that more Spaniards had arrived made it clear that this was an invasion force. These men were here to stay. After the Inca fulfilled their promise, it became obvious to Pizarro and his men that Atahualpa had outlived his usefulness and was now only a liability. If he were rescued...
Yeah, I also find it interesting how, like going back to the gold and silver thing, that just recently that those prices have hit like all-time highs in history. And we talk about like all throughout history, there's just the most valuable metals and the most valuable things, like economically. And like just recently they hit like all-time highs in history. It's just kind of fascinating to me.
They would not be able to defeat the resistance.
But I guess inflation has a way of doing that.
On July 26, 1533, Atahualpa was brought into the main square of Cajamarca and was tied to a wooden stake. The native population gathered around in awe at what was happening. Atahualpa was not only the supreme ruler of the empire, but also their god. Watching this happen must have shaken the entire world view of the local people. Valverde, the same friar that offered him a Bible a month before, came to him and offered a baptism. If Atahualpa rejected this offer, he would be burned alive. No fate could be worse for him. If his body were not
baptized
perfectly
or else you
preserved
die.
like the previous emperors, then he would not pass on correctly to the afterlife.
That's crazy.
He accepted and was quickly baptized. Still, he was then strangled to death as a Christian. The conquistadors soon left Cajamarca and began the long trek to Cuzco. As the square and that lonely stake...
Because you're forcefully being baptized means you're a Christian.
Its center faded into the distance, Pizarro and his men must have felt confident that this wealthy empire was already in their hands. But the conquest of the Inca was far from over.
It's true. Oh, we're going to end it there, huh? Interesting.
Thank you for watching this video in our series on the pre-Columbian civilizations.
Alright. Yeah, so it's not till 1572 that it's fully gone. But anyway, let's go ahead and keep going. So, we're going to finish the Spanish Age. And after this, we're going to talk about the other nations that existed in the Americas. So, to finish the Spanish Age we've been talking about for a while now, I just thought I'd give you like a quick timeline, just an overview of the different settlements that existed in the colonial timeline of Spain, just like the influential ones. So Santo Domingo was one of the first real ones in 1496. Obviously, the first was Christopher Columbus's settlement in Hispaniola in 1493 on his second voyage. But then you get San Juan, Puerto Rico by Juan Ponce de Leon in 1508. You can see there's settlements happening in Mexico, in Central America. We get Lima in Peru right after, in 1535, right after the conquest of the Inca Empire. Mexico City comes after the Aztec Empire is conquered in 1521. And then we get what's very interesting here is in Santiago de Chile, which Santiago is like I said in the video, the Spanish battle cry, which is it's kind of a interesting name. And then St. Augustine in Florida in the United States, which I've never been to, but I want to go to, was founded in 1565 by the Spanish. The Spanish controlled all that. And then Santa Fe, New Mexico, they went up the Rio Grande and founded that in 1610, which is the latest one I have on this list. But the Spanish stayed in the Americas until the 19th century, and then in the Caribbean until almost the 20th century. So it's just amazing how they all lasted. But if we go back to the previous slide I showed you about the Spanish Empire, this is the reach of the Spanish Empire at its peak. The only thing it didn't control is Brazil and Guyana and Suriname, which is Portuguese and others, French and things. But basically the entire western United States, western Canada, the entire Pacific coast. The entire Pacific coast was controlled, and then the Atlantic coast here in Florida. Then even after U.S. independence, they still control a lot of this. Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, South America. It's incredible. And then the Philippines over here as well. So we already went over all them, so let's go ahead and let's move on to the rise of the English. So this is where the United States kind of branches off of, the English. So we were originally a British colony, not a Spanish colony. I'm currently speaking to you in English, not Spanish. So that's why. But anyway, in 1497, King Henry VII, who is from the house of Tudor, he's the father of Henry VIII, one of the most famous kings. And he's the guy who wins the War of the Roses officially in 1485, defeating Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth, ending the Wars of the Roses, which had happened for decades. And then the 100 Years' War also came to an end that century. 15th century was a very influential, very consequential century. But he orders a man named John Cabot right here to explore what they call the Northwest Passage, which is a idea that has started to spread that you can reach Asia from and get across the American continent through what is known as the Northwest Passage. It's a way to sail through it. And the Northwest Passage is something that didn't really exist, and it's something that was believed to exist, and people even in the 19th century were still looking for the Northwest Passage, which I guess technically you could go up here and then go ahead and cross the Bering Strait. I guess that could be it, but anyway, and this was essentially to compete with Iberian powers, because the Portuguese and Spanish had already had a head start on this. John Cabot first lands in Newfoundland, which is in modern-day Canada, and then the English don't really do any settling in the land for a while. They're pretty much just there to look for this Northwest Passage and to do things like that. So it's not until the Elizabethan age where England starts to actually get some oomph. England was still a pretty minor power in the 1490s, but when we get to the Elizabethan age, things start to change. So I brought this up because this is a very influential time period in English history. This is the time that Shakespeare's writing. This is a very influential time. So the Protestant Reformation has happened. England has pretty much shifted to being a Protestant nation, whereas opposed to the other powers, France and Spain, that we talked about before, are Catholic. So we see this rivalry, religious ideological rivalry. But the Elizabethan age takes place from 1558 to 1603. It's the time that she's on the throne, Elizabeth I. And then we just ended the second Elizabethan age, supposedly, in 2022, when Queen Elizabeth II died. But they continue to search for the Northwest Passage. No luck. During this time, England is strengthening its naval power and actually ends up defeating the Spanish Armada in 1588, which is a very influential time and really puts England on top in naval authority. Pirates began looting Spanish ships of gold, a thing we see in the Caribbean and in the New World, one of the things of the Age of Exploration. Similar to Vikings, but kind of the modern form of Vikings. We see piracy take place, looting of ships, attacking settlements, things like this, robberies. This is a very common thing, and most pirates of the time, which pirates are real historical figures, but they've been very like mythologized through pop culture and things. But most pirates were actually of English origin, and what the English would do is they would have pirates who would loot Spanish ships of gold off the coast of the American colonies, and this was a thing that happened very commonly. Newfoundland is claimed for England in 1583, and then in 1585, which we're going to talk more about the colonies themselves in the next episode when we talk about colonial United States, colonial England. Attempts are made by Sir Walter Raleigh to establish the colony in Roanoke, Virginia. In 1585, which doesn't go well. They try it one time, they have to abandon it, and they come back again, and then they leave, and then the entire colony is gone, and no one knows what happened to them. It's still one of the biggest mysteries today, but it was not successful. It was really the first English attempt at a colony. And then even after the Elizabethan age, we get Henry Hudson, who explores the Hudson Bay for the first time in 1610. That's what it's named after. So, sea power put England on top for centuries. The sun never sets on the Union Jack. That's right. Sun never sets in the British Empire. That is true. Naval superiority was key for England. So now we're going to talk about the very first English colonies. Now these are just going to be overviews, not too in depth. We're going to do that in the next episode. But these started to get established and founded in the early 17th century along the eastern seaboard of the modern United States. So we see kind of the emergence of the 13 colonies that exist. And there are more colonies than just the 13. Those just happen to be the ones who rebelled against the British crown later on. But this is before Britain existed. The reason I'm calling it England and not Britain is because Britain's not formed until 1707 when England and Scotland unite to form Great Britain. And then that eventually gets turned over to the United Kingdom in 1801. And then later on in, I believe, the 1920s, it becomes the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland instead of all of Ireland, because Ireland declares its independence, except the northern part. But complicated, but that's how it is. Jamestown, Virginia is considered to be the very first permanent English settlement in 1607 in Virginia. Now, obviously, like we talked about before, that was not the very first settlement in what is now the United States. That was St. Augustine, Florida in 1565. And you can also make the argument, as if you've ever seen the short that I made, Pensacola, Florida, was founded in 1559, which is actually older than St. Augustine, but it wasn't a permanent settlement. But anyway, Jamestown, Virginia, 1607. It's named after King James I. Also the same guy who authorized the King James Bible. You may know that. He's from the House of Stuart. England and Scotland had to unite under him. And so now we see the union between England and Scotland, which later down the line is going to form Great Britain. Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1620, you get the famous story of the Pilgrims coming over for religious freedom. The first Thanksgiving takes place between the natives and the English. Interesting. Then we get New Hampshire settled in 1623, and then in 1636 we get Maryland and Rhode Island. And later on we're going to get many other colonies later. You're going to get New York, which is conquered, which originally New Amsterdam, that's conquered from the Dutch, and then which the Dutch had, and then Delaware, which the Dutch also had, that had conquered from New Sweden, which we're going to talk about later. The Swedes and the Dutch were also on the eastern seaboard at the same time as the English. Kenneth Huber's donating $50. Let's go. I appreciate that, sir. Thank you very much. We appreciate your support. That is greatly appreciated. That's the largest super chat we've ever received. Thank you. I have to go to bed. I need to get up early. Great information. Thank you. I appreciate it. Will do, sir. All right. Awesome. Anyhow, yes. Oh, I can't believe it. All right. Awesome. Sweet. So getting back to this. First English colonies. So we're going to talk a little about here about the Anglo-Spanish Wars. Yeah, Commander, you can watch the rest of it later. I'm going to keep it posted. So let's go. It's very generous. Very generous. The Anglo-Spanish Wars. So this was a series of conflicts that kind of changes the dominance, the sphere of dominance between England and Spain at the time, between the 16th and 18th century. It wasn't just one Anglo-Spanish war; there were multiple, and it just kind of leading to the weakening of the Spanish Empire. The English and their allies secure the Atlantic seaboard of North America. Essentially, one of the outcomes of this. Looting of Spanish ships continues. Spanish support an Irish uprising against Protestant England. So the Spanish are also supporting other things against the English. So there's a clear rivalry going on here. The Spanish suffer a war of succession in 1700, which weakened Spain's power. The War of the Spanish Succession after the inbreeding of the Habsburg dynasty. You get Charles II with the famous chin, and then he dies without kids, and so the Spanish throne has to go to Louis Le Grand Dauphin's son, Louis XIV's grandson, Felipe the fifth, who becomes the King of Spain from the House of Bourbon. So, yes, it was, Marlene. Yes, it was. So those are very influential. Last thing I want to touch on with the English accomplishments and British accomplishments in the age of exploration is James Cook, who was quite later, not related to James Cook, but the British East India Company is founded in 1600, which plays a huge role in imperialism and colonialism later down the line and the spread of the British Empire. And then later on, the British monarchy directly rules it. And so I believe all of the monarchs between Queen Victoria and King George VI are all emperors of India, which is interesting. But it was essentially a business colony at first. Britain had business colonies and imperial colonies. So that's interesting. But obviously the British colonies stay a thing. Well, we'll talk about this in a second. So James Cook is the first to really map the Pacific Ocean in 1769. Even in the late 18th century, a lot of the Pacific Ocean hadn't really been explored. So he goes down to the Antarctic region here, discovers New Zealand and the eastern coast of Australia, which is very influential. He also discovers Hawaii, which I didn't put on here. Oh yeah, first European to reach Hawaii in 1778, which is where he died shortly after that. He's buried there. But James Cook plays a big role. He's one of the last really explorers of his age. And the British Empire stays around even after U.S. independence. That's one of the things that weakens it in America. Then you obviously get the Monroe Doctrine, which gets all these guys out of the Western Hemisphere. But Britain stays around in Canada. I mean, Canada is still directly controlled by the British Crown until 1867, and even today, Canada is part of the British Commonwealth. So that's always interesting to note. So now we're going to talk about the French in America. So I have another video that I'm going to watch. We're going to watch about them. But let's go over them real quick. So they existed in America from 1534 to 1763, and even a little bit later under Napoleon. Jacques Cartier, who is really the first major guy, Frenchman, to come to America, North America specifically. He arrives in the Gaspe Peninsula in search of the Northwest Passage. So the French were also inclined on this idea of the Northwest Passage, and they wanted to compete with the English to find it first. And so that's his goal. He ends up discovering and exploring the St. Lawrence River, obviously that Catholic influence, the St. Lawrence River. And ends up going to Coachelaga, arriving there in 1535, which is modern Montreal. The French become enthralled. They get distracted by this Northwest Passage, enthralled at the lucrative fur trade with the Native Americans, which leads to conflicts known as like the Beaver Wars and things like that. So we are now going to talk about the Beaver Wars, but we're going to talk about the settlements and the collapse of New France after that. But let's go ahead and talk about what the Beaver Wars are, because we have probably brought it up before, but it's important to know this is a 7-minute video about just a little bit about New France and the Beaver Wars. So let's get into it.
Centuries before the U.S. was even born. Of history. In the fantastic school systems of the U.S., colonization of the New World is often taught in generalizations. Hundreds of years of
We
history
talked about this
summed up
earlier.
as Columbus sailing the ocean, pilgrims, colonies, America, and manifest destiny all the way to the Pacific. When history is so simplified, it's often forgotten just how political colonial America was, centuries before the U.S. was even born.
So here we see kind of a nice map. Let's just like take a look at it real quick. So this is Quebec, which later gets founded, I believe, in 1608. The Beaver Wars take place between 1609 and 1701. So we didn't get into between the colonies yet, but we're going to get into them in a minute. We see by this point that New Netherlands exists, and also the English have some colonies in Connecticut, Massachusetts, Virginia, and Maryland, and Carolina down here. The Shawnee are living in the Ohio River Valley here, the Cherokee down here, the Illinois, the Lakota, the Sioux, nomads, the Great Plains out here, Minnesota people, so a lot of this is unknown. The Iroquois Confederacy is very powerful, and they're some of the ones that are going to be trading with the French and the Dutch. But the fur trade is lucrative, and the French want it. The beaver trade and things like that. So the Beaver Wars is a conflict with the within the Iroquois Confederacy to try to, get trade amongst the European powers. So it's interesting. It's complicated.
Political colonial America.
And the colony of the Three Fires. I'm not sure what that is actually.
Centuries before the U.S. was even born. Colonization was political
colonial
America was. Centuries before the U.S. was even born. Colonization wasn't just colonial America was. Centuries before the U.S. was even born. Colonization wasn't just natives versus Europeans. It was tribe versus tribe, European versus European. There was entire political dynamics lost to the span of time. The land was eventually dominated by Europeans, but before then, it was a complex web of intertribal and European relationships, sometimes leading to war and devastation on all fronts. Wars for resources aren't new. If other people have something you don't and you fight for it, that's a war for resources. In modern day, the first thought that popped in your mind is probably oil. But in 17th century North America, the most valuable resource was fur. Fur was a status symbol, used to make clothing and hats, and to Europeans, it was a must. What fur was the most sought after? Beavers! This trade of fur, however, led to some unforeseen consequences, spurring one people to invade.
Oh my gosh, the fire alarm's going off, guys. Hey guys, we're gonna pause the stream. I'm gonna leave the stream on. I gotta go outside soon. This is very normal. This happens all the time. So I'm gonna sit here and I'll be back in a minute.
Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? Been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators. Attention, please. May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators.
folks, I'm back. Sorry about that. I was just trying to watch a video on the Beaver Wars, and yeah, that happened. By the way, this is completely normal. The building is not on fire, at least as far as I'm aware. But yeah, that happens a lot. Sorry about that inconvenience. Boy, this is the life of a college student. This we got a real issue with that here on this campus of fire alarms, but that's what happens. Somebody probably just burnt popcorn or something. Let's keep going.
Throughout the Great Lakes region, causing a conflict of truly...
So anyway, we're in the Beaver Wars between the French and other European settlers and the Iroquois Confederacy.
unknown devastation.
And other native tribes.
Beaver Wars. Insert joke about certain rodent firing certain anti-tank sniper rifle. What were the Beaver Wars? The Iroquois were the largest force in 17th century New York. They were not one tribe.
Upstate New York, mostly.
Instead, the Iroquois Confederacy was a united alliance of 5, later 6 tribes. Seneca nations, Mohawk, Onondaga, Oneida, and Cayuga. In its founding, the nations, Mohawk, Onondaga, Oneida, and Cayuga.
So this was one of many examples of Native American confederacies. We'll see Tecumseh doing this. We'll see many different Native American leaders making confederacies of groups to be stronger. And this is one of the first examples, but this was created before European arrival. We believe the Iroquois Confederacy came out sometime between probably the 1100s and the 1500s.
In its founding, the League comprised of what is today upstate New York. They had a complex legal system, and each tribe played an important part to the survival of the Confederacy. Then the Europeans came. As those numerous post-apocalyptic movies and games mentioned, population loss leads
sophisticated tribes.
to power vacuums. New players come in, and there's less stability for old ones. It's believed Native Americans lost 90% of their population to disease brought by Europeans, even with the smallpox
So that's the
plague.
So that's talking about, that's the same statistic we heard in the Inca video. So I guess 90% of all Native American groups, pre-Columbian groups, died of smallpox. It's 9 out of 10.
Iroquois remained a predominant force, not a puppet of Europeans, but a decider in regional politics and trade. When Europeans first began to settle North America, New England, Canada, and the Great Lakes didn't offer environments for plantations like in the Caribbean and South America. However, they did offer a new resource. For pelts, the beaver had nearly been hunted to extinction in Europe, but in the New World, it was plentiful. A whole new market opened up. Who could hunt the beavers? Natives. So began a new relationship between Europeans and native tribes. Natives hunted, sold to Europeans, and would receive metal, jewelry, and weapons in exchange. Europeans made cash back home. The Iroquois, with their increasing power, knew the advantage of this prosperous trade, and benefited greatly from establishing ties with Europeans. As all resource trading...
This is one of the difference between the major tribes. Is the Iroquois, the major European colonists. The French had a completely different mindset than a culture like the Spanish or the British. The Spanish and the British wanted to settle the land and live on it and harvest the land and all this stuff and kill all the Native Americans. The French wanted to trade with the Native Americans so they could get access to their stuff. And it was a mutual relationship as opposed to a one-sided relationship with the Spanish and British and English. But the French were actually doing it respectfully, in my opinion, more respectfully.
It's all
to honoring the Native American culture.
All fine and good until that resource run.
Because the French never really wanted to have an imperial empire in America. Maybe they wanted to down the line, but that wasn't their initial goal. Was to set up as many settlements as they could. They just wanted to trade.
Turns out, fur trading made tribes powerful, and whoever controlled the fur trade held power over their rivals. So to keep that power, you need fur. Tribes hunted so much to keep up with European demand, beaver populations were depopulated in upstate New York and lower Canada. To keep up with lost beavers and ravaged by smallpox, to the Iroquois, drastic measures had to be taken. Armed with European weapons, the Iroquois decided to expand and seize new hunting grounds, and so began the Beaver Wars. The Iroquois,
so you see an alliance with Native Americans,
had the blessing of the Dutch, who keep in mind still had New Amsterdam by now, to take any measures possible to secure new furs and profit. The first conquest pushed out the Mohicans and Algonquins by 1630.
The Dutch were another major trading colony, and European colony.
10 years
New
later,
Amsterdam.
confident in their strength, the Iroquois drove out the Huron, who were replaced by the Ottawa. Now, these conquests were not pretty, as war often is.
Colonists, I should
War
say.
raids were fast, violent attacks. Storm a village, kill and torture the men, then kidnap the women and children. Weapons of use were typically tomahawk, arrows, or guns. And with guns, the Iroquois had an incredible advantage over their enemies. So the Dutch weren't too fond of the French, and the Iroquois weren't too very fond of the allies of the French. So when thousands of Iroquois happened to attack New France with Dutch guns, it was surely a coincidence. Right? By the 1650s, the Iroquois began attacking the French directly. If you were a colonist in 1650s Quebec, an Iroquois attack was your worst nightmare. Montreal was even a target at times. French allies of the Huron, Wendat, and neutral tribes all had been destroyed, enslaved, or assimilated. I'm not going to go down a list of everyone the Iroquois pissed off. Eventually, the French had enough and formed an alliance with their native friends to fend off attacks, scorching the earth and starving the Iroquois into submission by 1666. With relative peace with France, the Iroquois expanded west. Over a series of decades, they invaded and fought against other alliances, such as the Council of the Three Fires, wiping out populations and conquering Ohio, Michigan, and land all the way to the Mississippi. This is oversimplifying. Wars for Ohio between the tribes sometimes took a decade, and plenty of interpolitical conflict.
Yeah, it's believed that like what we now know as like the Shawnee that lived in Ohio like removed because the Iroquois pushed them west.
Occurred. The result from this expansion created a massive population of refugees. The Iroquois held these lands for over 50 years, centralizing their culture, position, and government. War raids became more efficient, and tribal politics took less importance over the Confederacy. By the 1680s, war began again when the French attempted to control trade.
Yeah, this whole, it's not like there was one fighting going on for 92 years. It was like little skirmishes here and there, and like it's just like a prolonged thing. It wasn't like a total war for, like World War II. It wasn't like a total war for 92 years. It was like just like on and off, kind of spontaneous, kind of like the 100 Years' War was.
Of the Mississippi. War between the French and Iroquois
was not a
lasted
traditional
for another
war either.
decade until both sides simply became tired of fighting. Meanwhile, the English were simply building up strength and were now a new formidable enemy. A peace treaty was signed between the chiefs and French leaders, resulting in the Iroquois Confederacy becoming a formidable buffer between the French Canadians and English colonists. Algonquin refugees were allowed back into their old homes. Ohio was split among the Miami in northwest Ohio and the Shawnee in the central and south. The Beaver Wars led to the deaths of thousands in raids, battles, and war between tribes and occasionally Europeans. It reflected just how much the drive for trade and wealth can create violence between groups. Just the pelt from this simple animal transformed the demographics of the entire Great Lakes region. An entire conflict left as a footnote in American history books, even though it certainly dominated the politics of 17th century colonial America. This is Cody of Alternate History Hub.
Yep, so that was Alternate History Hub's channel, so very nice to hear from them. The first video I didn't mention was from Smithsonian Magazine. So let's go ahead and go back to this slideshow. We haven't been here for a while. So we talked about Jacques Cartier. So now let's get down to New France, the settlements, and the collapse of New France, French Empire in America. So they were the first to explore the Great Lakes region. The French were. Quebec was founded in 1608 by Samuel de Champlain. And then a man named Robert de La Salle is the first to map the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico and claims it for France. So the French come up here and then claim down through here, the Mississippi River, east of it, west of it, through the Ohio Valley. And then there's a dispute at the Ohio River Valley, kind of where the Appalachian Mountains are today, about whether that territory should be English or French. And so that leads to the French and Indian War in 1763, which brings an end to New France. We also get settlements like New Orleans, Detroit, Montreal, and Louisburg throughout the 1700s. But 1763, the Treaty of Paris is signed, ending what is known worldwide as the 7 Years' War, and in the United States as the French and Indian War, which I'm currently going to college at Ohio University, which is in southeastern Ohio, a town called Athens, Ohio, which is kind of that same area. The last surviving French and Indian War veteran was actually died in Granville, Ohio, which is like around Columbus. It's not like an hour from here, probably. That's really interesting. Died in the 1840s. The war happened between 1754 and 1763. It was kind of considered to be the First World War. Kind of led to the French losing their colonies and also French Revolution in many ways as well. The French were dominant, but their notions and their like sentiments with Native Americans is in my opinion the most fascinating thing. It's the French and Indian War because we know it from the British side as Americans and people living in the United States because we were fighting against the French and the Indians rather than Native Americans. Thanks, Christopher Columbus. Anyway, let's keep going. Now we're going to talk about the Dutch in America, and then also the Swedes a little bit as well. So, the Dutch found the colony of New Netherlands in 1614, exists until 1674. So the Dutch have very similar motives to the French. They exist on the eastern seaboard. They established colonies in North America for economic gain. Fur trade with the natives is very important. The Iroquois are competing with the Dutch and the French. Commercial partnerships with the Iroquois exist. They conquered New Sweden in 1655. New Sweden was around Delaware area, so the Dutch conquered New Sweden, and then the New Netherlands is conquered by the British, the English, who conquered Delaware and it became a colony. And it's actually the first state to ratify the Constitution in 1787. But New Amsterdam is conquered by England in 1664, and when they conquered New Amsterdam, like, Amsterdam's the capital of the Netherlands, so we probably shouldn't have a Dutch name be this name of this city. So let's change it to, oh, I know, right? They'll change it to, New York, to an English name. So New York today, was originally Dutch settlement. New Amsterdam. A lot of people don't know that, but it's true. This is the final slide for today's stream. We're going to be talking about the Swedish were actually in America for a few decades, not too much significant. The expansion of Russia. Now, Russia, you're like, wait, Russia wasn't in America. Well, Russia did have one American colony, and that was the Alaska. So in the 16th century, in the 1550s, the middle of the 16th century specifically, the Russian Tsar Ivan the Terrible, one of the most famous czars, pushes for expansion into Siberia, which is now part of eastern Russia. And this is why Russia today is geographically the largest nation in the world and so big, because Siberia had been a really nomadic region before. No one really had ever claimed it because it was desolate and just a frozen wasteland. But Ivan the Terrible is like, let's conquer that for Russia. So Siberia becomes part of Russia. The Bering Straits officially crossed in 1728, which links they had the theory that this part of Russia, of Siberia, linked to North America, which it did. And then the Russian Empire claims Alaska in 1741, which that's going to be controlled by Russia until 1867, when it's purchased by the United States under Andrew Johnson's presidency. Secretary of State William Seward works out that deal. Very influential figure. He's the guy who was almost assassinated. Some guy came into his room and stabbed him with a knife, but he was recovering from a neck injury and it saved him. Probably get more into that later on in the series, but really interesting. But anyway, that's William Seward. I'm getting way off track. But Russia claims Alaska in 1741, which is now part of the United States. That's interesting. And then Russia ultimately becomes the world's largest geographic nation, which it still is today. But that's the expansion of the Russian Empire. And then you get Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, who expand into Poland and Crimea, and then later on even the Soviet Union. So that's the expansion of Russia in America, pretty much just limited to Alaska. So that is going to conclude today's stream. Do we have any questions in the comments or concerns or anything like that? Marlene, what did you think about this? This is the end of the stream. I guess it was interesting having that break in the middle for the fire alarm, but that's what happens. People do that all the time. Yeah, so that's going to include episode 2. Next time, we're going to talk about life in colonial America. So we're going to learn about the politics behind colonial America, get a little more deep dive into the colonies themselves, and maybe even get in a little bit of the causes of the revolution. So that'll be fun. It was a great stream. Thank you, Marlene. I'm going to end it here. Probably going to go to bed. I got to get up early. So I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.